You ever stop and think, how do we really know what happened 2,000 years ago? I mean, we've got all these incredible epic stories about ancient Greece and Rome, right? But the truth is that our entire picture of the ancient world is basically built on a shipwreck. So let's dive in and see exactly what washed ashore.
Okay, let's just start with a number. And this number, it's pretty mind-blowing. 2.5%. Yeah, that's it. According to one estimate, that is all we have left of the historical writing from classical antiquity. Just think about that. That's 1/40th. It means for every single book that made it to us today, 39 others just vanished, gone.
So, that brings up a pretty huge question, doesn't it? If 97.5% of the evidence is just gone, how can we possibly claim to know anything about the ancient world? I mean, how do you even begin to reconstruct an entire civilization from just its shadows?
All right, to even start to wrap our heads around this, we have to take a walk through a library of ghosts. We really need to feel the sheer, staggering scale of what's been lost.
Now, you might think, okay, but the best stuff probably survived, right? Like a kind of literary survival of the fittest. And that's a huge mistake. The reality is, most works died out for totally random reasons. Maybe the writing style just went out of fashion. Or, readers in the Roman Empire couldn't be bothered with some complicated period of Greek history. Or, and this happened all the time, a newer, shorter summary came along that made the original 20-volume epic seem, well, kind of disposable. A lot of the time, survival was just pure dumb luck.
So, in this massive shipwreck of knowledge, a few key people and their books managed to cling to the wreckage. These are the survivors. So let's meet the handful of authors who are basically the foundation, the very bedrock of almost everything we think we know.
First up, you've got Herodotus, the OG, the guy they call the father of history. He's our main man for that legendary clash between the teeny-tiny Greek city-states and the colossal Persian Empire. And he wasn't just a historian, he was a master storyteller, picking up stories and gossip from all over.
Then there's Xenophon. Now, this guy's a whole different story. He's not some scholar sitting in a library. He's a soldier, an Athenian knight who fought as a mercenary deep in enemy territory. So his writing, it's much more like a personal memoir, and it's totally colored by his own life, especially his growing disgust with Athenian democracy and his big-time admiration for their rival, Sparta.
And rounding out our big three is Plutarch. He was actually writing way later, centuries later. And honestly, he wasn't really a historian the way we think of one. He was a priest, a philosopher. His whole goal wasn't to get the timeline perfectly right. It was to write these biographies that could teach you and me a lesson about morality, about virtue, about what makes a good person.
Okay, so we've got our survivors: Herodotus, Xenophon, Plutarch. But here's the kicker, and this is absolutely crucial. What if these guys weren't even trying to write history as we know it today? What if they had completely different agendas?
Let's just look at what they said themselves. Herodotus comes right out and tells us his goal at the very start of his book. He says his whole purpose is to preserve get this, the fame of great achievements. See what's missing? There's nothing in there about objectivity or impartial analysis or any of that stuff.
And Plutarch, he's even more blunt about it. He literally says, "It is not histories that I am writing, but lives." I mean, he couldn't be clearer. He doesn't care about the big picture, the grand sweep of events. He's zooming in on the individual, using these famous lives as like case studies in what it means to be human.
So let's just put them side by side for a second. You've got Herodotus, who's basically in a battle against time, trying to make sure great deeds aren't forgotten. And then you have Plutarch, who's basically writing a series of morality tales. The bottom line? Neither of them is trying to be a neutral, scientific reporter of just the facts.
And what about Xenophon, our soldier? His histories are anything but a neutral account. They are the deeply personal, subjective story of a guy who was right in the thick of it. He's bitter about how Athens handled things, and he's not shy about his pro-Sparta bias. This is history from the inside, and it comes with all the passion and all the prejudice you'd expect. Okay, so our main sources are all biased. They all have agendas. That feels like a massive problem, right? But what about all those lost historians, the 97.5%? Could they give us a better picture? Well, you might think they're gone for good, but this is where things get really, really cool. We can actually find little ghosts of their work hidden inside the books that did survive. The key idea here is something called a cover text. Just imagine this. A later author writes a book, and his book survives.
But in his book, he quotes one sentence or retells one little story from a much older history that's now totally lost. That book that survived, that's the cover text. And it's doing two things at once. It's protecting this tiny little fragment of the past, but it's also distorting it because it's been ripped out of its original home.
And here's a perfect example of how that works. So some ancient author writes a massive 10-volume history. Over the centuries, every single copy gets lost or destroyed. But 100 years later, some other writer quotes a single sentence from Volume 4 to make a point in his own book, and his book survives. And boom, just like that, this huge, monumental work is reduced to one single, floating, out-of-context sentence. That's what a fragment is. It's this tiny, tiny echo of a world that's otherwise gone silent.
So, where does all this leave us? It means we have to completely change how we think about the past. We can't approach it like we're just reading a book. It's much more like we're archaeologists carefully exploring a ruin.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's that our knowledge of the ancient world isn't some perfect, high-definition photograph. A better way to think about it is as a fragile mosaic. It's beautiful, it's fascinating, but it's totally incomplete. It's been painstakingly pieced together from the few, biased, and often broken shards that just happen to make it through the centuries.
And it's so important to remember that this loss wasn't always some big, dramatic library burning down. A lot of the time, the reasons were, well, kind of boring and mundane. Like we said, taste just changed. A brilliant history could just fade away because a newer, shorter summary became more popular, or because its language just sounded old-fashioned. It was a quiet death by 1,000 cuts, a slow process of neglect.
And that leaves us with a final, kind of haunting thought. Our entire picture of Western history, of these great civilizations, it's all built on this tiny 2.5% sliver of what was actually written. We cherish the works of Herodotus, Xenophon, and Plutarch. But if this is the incredible stuff we got from the lucky few that survived, what kind of breathtaking masterpieces, what totally different views of the world were in the 97.5% that we lost forever?